Timber milling was one of the very earliest industries in the Bundanoon area. As the land was heavily forested with good quality timber on the plateau as well in the gullies, it was relatively easy to set up the mills. The first known commercial sawmills in the Bundanoon district were set up in the 1870s by the Amos brothers, Alexander and Robert, about 2 miles on the Sydney side of Jordan's Crossing. The sawmill was in the Osborne and Morris's bush, and the brothers bought the rights to the timber on the property. They had the contract to supply timber for the railway line between Yass Junction and Wagga Wagga. By 1877, there were 2 mills working about half a mile apart. They employed 100 men, 60 at the mill and 40 in the bush, and they earned between 7 shillings and sixpence and 12 shillings a day. Stringy bark and box were used extensively for railway sleepers. An adzing machine was used for slotting the sleepers at the rate of 100 an hour, with an average of 600 sleepers being produced each day.
I have an old hammer which is handmade and originally owned by my great-grandfather Harkless when the railway line went through, and it has got a PP on one end, which stands for private property, and on the other end it has a quarter of a moon and a star on it, which they use for stamping the sleepers when they're cut.
It required 110 bullocks and 11 drays, as well as 5-horse drays and 25 horses to bring logs from the bush to the mill. Besides railway sleepers, posts and rails and girders were also cut at the mill. The supervisors built their own cottages and the men built approximately 40 huts to live in. The most well-known timber mills in Bundanoon were established by Samuel Tooth and his sons Joseph and Edward. In 1879, the Tooths sawed the slabs that were used to build the first Holy Trinity Anglican church in the village. The Tooths established timber mills on land that they owned in the Bundanoon gullies and in the Penrose Road vicinity, close to the railway and the Erith colliery. In 1885, the newspaper reports that Samuel Tooth was preparing to open a sawmill in the gully. This may have been on land at the bottom of Constitution Hill. Joseph and Edward started a sawmill at Beecham's Cliffs, which was referred to as Tooth's Folly. A well was cut into the sandstone of the cliffs to collect water from the rock surface that sloped towards it. Unfortunately, the eucalyptus leaves collected in the well and made the water unsuitable to steam drive the engine to work the mill. Instead, water was carted from the creek with the aid of 2 bullocks. Steam was used to power the mill, and a heavy wire rope was fitted to a steam winch to haul the logs up the cliff face. Beecham's Cliffs Mill was later abandoned, and the little rock well is now a tourist attraction known as the Wishing Well. In about 1902, the Tooth brothers established a mill at the top of Bundanoon Gully. This was known as the Riverview Steam Sawmills. Joseph and Edward Tooth were very enterprising in their efforts to get the timber up from the gullies, and by 1904 they had constructed a cable-hauled tramway down to the creek 1,300 feet below, and a road along the creek to draw logs to the bottom of the tramway. The Tooth brothers took 5 months to build the first stage of their tramway, but just after it was completed, a flood swept down the gully and washed the whole thing away. They resumed work and after 15 months had finished it, but lost all of the equipment, a quantity of timber and the landing in the gully during the 1904-1905 bushfire. Fortunately, the mill and tramway were saved. The tramway was located between what is now Riverview Lookout and Mark Morton's Lookout. The Tooths operated sawmills at Toits Road and in Penrose Road in the area almost opposite Ross Street.
My grandfather, Fred, he worked for Tooths at the mill down Toits Road, and the timber that they cut out of that mill, which they used to do after work and so forth, and from what I could make out, they didn't charge them. That was way back in 1917, and they built the house in 28 Old Winslow Road around about that time. Tooths had a sawmill on Penrose Road, and they used to dump all the sawdust down between the back of the mill and the railway and just set fire to it, but it used to make too much smoke, and they then later built a afterburner to get rid of as much of the smoke as they could.
The sawmill was destroyed in the 1952 bushfires. In 1888, the Freeman brothers started a new sawmill. Freemans owned land between Bundanoon and Exeter, adjoining the railway, so the sawmill was probably in that area. The brick bridge over the railway line at the northern end of Erith Street replaced a wooden one known as Freeman's Bridge, which connected their property that had been cut by the railway. They were still advertising sawn timber for sale in 1899. By 1910, another sawmill managed by Edward Selim was operating beside the railway in Erith Street. This mill produced sawn hardwood, split posts, rails, palings and telephone poles. The sawmill no longer exists, and the site now contains residential properties. As settlement increased and the forests were cleared around Bundanoon, the timber getters and sawmills moved out to areas such as Canyon Lee.